God's provision in verse 11. So, after coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So, when God calls, he provides. Am I right?
Amen.
All right. Y'all awake here?
Yeah.
All right. Let me repeat that. When God calls, he provides. God wouldn't have just sent them to Egypt and be like, you're on your own, good luck. No, that was not the case whatsoever. God provided them with the wise men. My dad and I were just kind of discussing this, was it last week or a couple weeks ago, that I never really thought about it, but I know as a little child growing up, I always wondered, what did they do with gifts? I didn't really think about it. Dad, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Dad asked the question, what do you think was the purpose of the gifts, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh? And I never really thought about it. And then it's kind of funny, last week when I was trying to decide and pray about what my sermon was going to be about, I thought about this. And then I was going over the sermon, and I was like, whoa, that's it. Dad and I were just talking about that, a few days before that. And this is what God provided for them, was the gold, the frankincense, and myrrh for them to go to Egypt. Because back then, gold and frankincense and myrrh were worth a lot of money. Well, gold's worth a lot of money now, because I think it's at its all-time high, unless that's changed recently. I don't know. But so it's amazing that if we just listen to God's call, he's going to provide for us. So next, we're going to look at Herod's anger through all this. And in verse 16, we see that Herod was enraged. He was angry, and then he sent for the babies under 2 years old to be slaughtered. Talk about post-Christmas blues. I mean, this isn't usually seen in the Christmas children's performances at all. That Herod's sending out, having babies being slaughtered. No, that you don't really think about that. And also, Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus running for their lives to get to Egypt. Dead babies are being left. I'm sorry, that's kind of graphic, but it's the truth, though. This is how horrid King Herod was. But we don't usually see this as part of the holiday picture, part of the Christmas spirit, Christmas, plays and everything. But this is reality, that this actually happened. And we don't see this because this is post-Christmas. So we're going to take a little bit closer look of who Herod is, or was, and who he was as a person. He was a mean and vicious person. History has a lot to say about him. Caesar Augustus was quoted that it would be better to be King Herod's pig than to be his son. That's pretty crazy, because the pigs were protected by law, but his family wasn't. That's pretty heavy right there. It was better to be King Herod's pigs. Can you believe that? Pigs are nothing really compared to us, because they eat the slop, eat whatever's left. I'm sure you know, since growing up in a farm. So that's crazy. You'd rather be King Herod's pigs than his own family. So we're going to take a little bit more things about King Herod. He had already killed 2 of his sons, which he had them strangled. He also killed 1 of his 10 wives, which happened to be his favorite, because she thought she was unfaithful, which she wasn't. And I don't know why you would want to kill your favorite wife. I mean, come on. No. But anyways, and he also killed his 18-year-old brother-in-law, because the Jews liked him better. I mean, I don't see why. I could see why somebody would like Herod better than that. But and he also killed his wife's own grandfather and her 80-year-old uncle who had once saved Herod's life. He also killed his own uncle and his mother-in-law. What's a few babies to, be thrown in a mix after what he did to his own family, to his own wife, to his own sons? What's a few babies in Bethlehem going to hurt his reputation? Nothing really. But the slaughter of innocent babies, that's such a harsh word to see, like slaughter of innocent babies. But it's the truth. But the slaughter of innocent babies is a fulfillment of prophecy that is mentioned in Jeremiah 31:15, which is recorded here in verse 18, that says, "A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping a great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted, because they were no more." Some of you might think, what does Rachel have to do with anything about Bethlehem or the Christmas story? Well, many of you might know that Rachel was the wife of Jacob in the Old Testament, but she just so happened to be buried in Bethlehem, which Bethlehem was about 5 miles south of Jerusalem. We're going to get into a little geography lesson right now. But Bethlehem was about 5 miles south of Jerusalem, and Ramah, which is another town, was about 5 miles north of Jerusalem. So what King Herod probably did was, he probably took one of those compasses, like things, that what they're called, where with a pencil and a needle, and he probably just took that, drew a circle around Jerusalem and said, just kill every baby under 2 years old. So that's what probably happened. And so that's what Ramah has to do with in the prophecy. We see that in the Old Testament, that these babies are being murdered. These innocent babies are being murdered. So, and fourthly, we're going to look at God's plan. In verse 15, we see that it had been God's plan all along, as it says in the Old Testament in Hosea 11:1, for Jesus to come out of Egypt, just like his children did under Moses 15 years prior, because they were under captivity with the Egyptians, the Israelites were. So, but Mary and Joseph would not be alone in Egypt. By this time, Egypt was under Roman law, but Herod did not have any power there. So there were several thousands of Jews that were already headed there to safety, to Egypt, to escape Herod's wrath. They had already established synagogues there, and they even had a temple there. So the land that had once, I think this is really neat, the land that had once enslaved the Jews, now Egypt has them as protection. And I just think that's neat how it kind of just goes around, how God's plan works like that. So we see in verse 19, King Herod finally dies. He finally dies. And a lot of people don't know this, but at the time, Herod knew he was going to die because he had this horrible, awful, painful disease. So knowing he was about to die, he had ordered the Jewish nobility to be locked up in a hippodrome. And for those of you that may not know what a hippodrome is, it's like a stadium where they held the chariot races and all that stuff that they did back in those times. So it's just a stadium, and that was to be surrounded by the soldiers. So when word came out of Herod's death, he would have these Jews that were captured in this hippodrome, in this stadium, murdered because he wanted weeping and wailing at his death, because he knew he was hated. He knew that people would not be crying over his death. So Herod died, but the order never did go out. Thankfully, the order never went out. So that's just a glimpse about how cruel and terrible this King Herod was. He had his own children and his own wife killed, and he murdered all these innocent babies. So Joseph, in verse 20, has another dream, and God reveals to him, says, "Go to Israel, go back to Israel, because